I can help with that, Beru said politely, moving to join Shmi, who was cooking dinner. Klieg and Owen were out closing down the perimeter of the compound, securing the farm from the oncoming night. A night that promised a dust storm. Smiling warmly and glad that this young woman was soon to be a member of their family, Shmi handed a knife over to Beru. Owen hadn't said anything yet about marrying Beru, but Shmi could tell from the way the two looked at each other. It was only a matter of time, and not much time at that, if she knew her stepson. Owen was not an adventurous type, was as solid as the ground beneath them, but when he knew what he wanted, he went after it with single-minded purpose. Beru was exactly that, and she obviously loved Owen as deeply as he loved her. She was well suited to be the wife of a moisture farmer, Shmi thought, watching her methodically go about her duties in the kitchen. She never shied from work, was very capable and diligent. And she doesn't expect much, or need much to make her happy, Shmi thought, for that, in truth, was the crux of it. Their existence here was simple and plain. There were few adventures, and none at all that were welcomed, for excitement out here usually meant that Tusken raiders had been seen in the region, or that a gigantic sandstorm or some other potentially devastating weather phenomenon was blowing up. The Lars family had only the simple things, mostly the company of each other, to keep them amused and content. For Klieg, this had been the only way of life he had ever known, a lifestyle that went back several generations in the Lars family. Same thing for Owen, and while Beru had grown up in Mos Eisley, she seemed to fit right in. Yes, Owen would marry her, Shmi knew, and what a happy day that would be! The two men returned soon after, along with C-3PO, the protocol droid Anakin had built back in the days when he had Watto's junkyard to rummage through.
2 more canned notes for you, Mr. Shmi,
the thin droid said, handing Shmi a pair of orange and green freshly picked vegetables.
I would have brought more, but I was told, and not in any civil way, that I must hurry.
Shmi looked to Klieg, and he gave her a grin and a shrug. Could have left him out there to get sandblasted clean, I suppose, he said. Of course, some of the bigger rocks that are sure to be flying about might have taken out a circuit or two.
Your pardon, Master Klieg,
C-3PO said.
I only meant...
We know what you meant, 3PO, Shmi assured the droid. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, then quickly pulled it away, thinking that a perfectly silly gesture to offer to a walking box of wires. Of course, C-3PO was much more than a box of wires to Shmi. Anakin had built the droid. Almost. When Anakin had left with the Jedi, 3PO had been perfectly functional, but uncovered, his wires exposed. Shmi had left him that way for a long time, fantasizing that Anakin would return to complete the job. Just before marrying Klieg had Shmi finished the droid herself, adding the dull metal coverings. It had been quite a touching moment for Shmi, an admission of sorts that she was where she belonged and Anakin was where he belonged. The protocol droid could be quite annoying at times, but to Shmi, C-3PO remained a reminder of her son. Of course, if there are Tuskens about, they'd likely have gotten him under wraps before the storm, Klieg went on, obviously taking great pleasure in teasing the poor droid. You're not afraid of Tusken raiders, are you, 3PO?
There is nothing in my program to suggest such fear,
3PO replied, though he would have sounded more convincing if he hadn't been shaking as he spoke, and if his voice hadn't come out all squeaky and uneven. Enough, Shmi demanded of Klieg. Oh, poor 3PO, she said, patting the droid's shoulder again. Go ahead now. I've got more than enough help this evening. As she finished, she waved the droid away. You're just as terrible to that droid, she remarked, moving beside her husband and playfully patting him across his broad shoulder. Well, if I can't have any fun with him, I'll have to set my sights on someone else, the rarely mischievous Klieg replied, narrowing his eyes and scanning the room. He finally settled a threatening gaze on Beru. "Klieg," Shmi was quick to warn. "What?" he protested dramatically. "If she's thinking to come out and live here, then she had better learn to defend herself." "Dad!" Owen cried. "Oh, don't fret about old Klieg," Beru piped in, emphasizing the word old. "A fine wife I would make if I couldn't outduel that one in a war of words." "Aha! A challenge!" Klieg roared. "Not so much of one from where I'm sitting," Beru dryly returned, and she and Klieg began exchanging some good-natured insults, with Owen chiming in every now and again. Shmi hardly listened, too engaged in merely watching Beru. Yes, she would certainly fit in. And well, about the moisture farm. Her temperament was perfect, solid but playful when the situation allowed. Gruff Klieg would verbally spar with the best of them, but Beru had to be counted among that elite lot. Shmi went back to her dinner preparations, her smile growing wider every time Beru hit Klieg with a particularly nasty retort. Intent on her work, Shmi never saw the missile coming, and when the overripe vegetable hit her on the side of the face, she let out a shriek. Of course, that only made the other three in the room howl with laughter. Shmi turned to see them sitting there, staring at her. From the embarrassed expression on Beru's face, and from the angle, with Beru sitting directly behind Klieg, it seemed obvious to Shmi that Beru had launched the missile, aiming for Klieg, but throwing it a bit high. "The girl listens when you tell her to stop," Klieg said, his sarcastic tone shattered by a burst of laughter that came right from his belly. He stopped when Shmi smacked him with a piece of juicy fruit, splattering it across his shoulders. A food fight began, measured, of course, and with more threats hurled than actual missiles. When it ended, Shmi began the cleanup, the other three helping for a bit. "You two go and spend some time together without your troublemaking father," Shmi told Owen and Beru. "Klieg started it, so Klieg will help clean it up. Go on now. I'll call you back when dinner's on the table." Klieg gave a little laugh. "And if you mess up the next one, you're going to be hungry," Shmi told him, threateningly waving a spoon his way. "And lonely." "Whoa, never that," Klieg said, holding his hands up in a sign of surrender. With a wave of the spoon, Shmi further dismissed Owen and Beru, and the two went off happily. "She'll make a fine wife," Shmi said to Klieg. He walked up beside her and grabbed her about the waist, pulling her tight. "We Lars men fall in love with the best women." Shmi looked back to see his warm and sincere smile, and she returned it in kind. This was the way it was supposed to be. Good, honest work, a sense of true accomplishment, and enough free time for some fun at least. This was the life Shmi had always wanted. This was perfect. Almost. A wistful look came over her face. "Thinking of your boy again," Klieg stated, instead of asking. Shmi looked at him, her expression a mixture of joy and sadness, a single dark cloud crossing a sunny blue sky. "Yes, but it's okay this time," she said. "He's safe now, I know, and doing great things." "But when we have such fun, you wish he could be here." Shmi smiled again. "I do, and in all other times as well. I wish Anakin had been here from the beginning, since you and I first met." 5 years ago, Klieg remarked. "He would love you as I do, and he and Owen." Her voice weakened and trailed away. "You think that Anakin and Owen would be friends?" Klieg asked. "Bah! Of course they would!" "You've never even met my Annie," Shmi scolded. "They'd be the best of friends," Klieg assured her, tightening his hug once again. "How could they not be, with you as that one's mother?" Shmi accepted the compliment gracefully, looked back, and gave Klieg a deep and appreciative kiss. She was thinking of Owen, of the young man's flowering romance with the lovely Beru. How Shmi loved them both! but that thought brought with it some level of discomfort. Shmi had often wondered if Owen had been part of the reason she had so readily agreed to marry Klieg. She looked back at her husband, rubbing her hand over his broad shoulder. Yes, she loved him, and deeply, and she certainly couldn't deny her joy at finally being relieved of her slave bonds. But despite all that, what part had the presence of Owen played in her decisions? It had been a question that had stayed with her all these years. Had there been a need in her heart that Owen had filled? A mother's need to cover the hole left by Anakin's departure? In truth, the two boys were very different in temperament. Owen was solid and staid, the rock who would gladly take over the farm from Klieg when the time came, as this moisture farm had been passed down in the Lars family from generation to generation. Owen was ready, and even thrilled, to be the logical and rightful heir to the place, more than able to accept the often difficult lifestyle in exchange for the pride and sense of honest accomplishment that came with running the place correctly. But Annie... Shmi nearly laughed aloud as she considered her impetuous and wanderlust-filled son put in a similar situation. She had no doubts that Anakin would give Klieg the same fits he had always given Watto. Anakin's adventurous spirit would not be tamed by any sense of generational responsibility, Shmi knew. His need to leap out for adventure, to race the pods, to fly among the stars, would not have been diminished, and it surely wouldn't have driven Klieg crazy. Now Shmi did giggle, picturing Klieg turning red-faced with exasperation when Anakin had let his duties slide once again. Klieg hugged her all the tighter at the sound, obviously having no clue of the mental images fluttering through her brain. Shmi melted into that hug, knowing that she was where she belonged, and taking comfort in the hope that Anakin, too, was where he truly belonged. She wasn't wearing one of the grand gowns that had marked the station of her life for the last decade and more. Her hair was not done up in wondrous fashion, with some glittering accessory woven into the thick brown strands. And in that plainness, Padme Amidala only appeared more beautiful and more shining. The woman sitting beside her on the bench swing, so obviously a relation, meetings to which she had referred were not high on her personal wish list. Padme looked over at her, then looked back at the playhouse where Solo's daughters, Ryu and Pooja, were in the midst of a wild game of tag. It was one meeting, Padme explained. The Queen had some information to pass along. About the Military Creation Act, Solo stated. Padme didn't bother to confirm the obvious. The Military Creation Act, now before the Senate, was the most important piece of business in many years, one that held implications for the Republic, even beyond those during the dark time when Padme had been queen and the Trade Federation had tried to conquer Naboo. The Republic is all in a tumult, but not to fear, for Senator Amidala will put it all right, Sola said. Padme turned to her, somewhat surprised by the level of sarcasm in Sola's tone. That's what you do, right? Sola innocently asked. It's what I try to do. It's all you try to do. What is that supposed to mean? Padme asked, her face twisting with puzzlement. I am a senator after all. A senator after a queen, and probably with many more offices ahead of her, Sola said. She looked back at the playhouse and called for Ryu and Pooja to ease up. You speak as if it's a bad thing, Padme remarked. Sola looked at her earnestly. It's a great thing, she said, if you're doing it all for the right reasons. And what is that supposed to mean? Sola shrugged, as if she wasn't quite sure. I think you've convinced yourself that you're indispensable to the Republic, she said, that they couldn't get along at all without you. Sis! It's true, Sola insisted. You give and give and give and give. Don't you ever want to take? Just a little? Padme's smile showed that Sola's words had caught her off guard. Take what? Sola looked back at Ryu and Pooja. Look at them. I see the sparkle in your eyes when you watch my children. I know how much you love them. Of course I do. Wouldn't you like to have children of your own? Sola asked. A family of your own? Padme sat up straight, her eyes going wide. She started, and stopped. You know what I mean. Padme gave a little laugh and a shake of her head, and turned back to Ryu and Pooja. Is everyone to be defined by their children? She asked. Of course not, Sola replied. It's not that at all. Or not just that. I'm talking about something bigger, sis. You spend all of your time worrying about the problems of other people, of this planet's dispute with that planet, or whether this trade guild is acting fairly toward that system. All your energy is being thrown out there to try to make the lives of everyone else better. What's wrong with that? What about your life? Sola asked in all seriousness. What about Padme Amidala? Have you even thought about what might make your life better? Most people who have been in public service as long as you have would have retired by now. I know you get satisfaction in helping other people. That's pretty obvious. But what about something deeper for you? What about love, sis? And yes, what about having kids? Have you even thought about it? Have you even wondered what it might be like for you to settle down and concern yourself with those things that will make your own life fuller? Padme wanted to retort that her life didn't need to be any fuller, but she found herself holding back the words. Somehow, they seemed hollow to her at that particular moment, watching her nieces romping about the backyard of the house, now jumping all about poor R2-D2, Padme's astromech droid. For the first time in many days, Padme's thoughts roamed free of her responsibilities, free of the important vote she would have to cast in the Senate in less than a month. Somehow, the words Military Creation Act couldn't filter through the whimsical song that Ryu and Pooja were then making up about R2-D2. Too close, Owen remarked gravely to Klieg, the two of them walking the perimeter of the moisture farm, checking the security. The call of a bantha, the large and shaggy beasts often ridden by Tuskens, had interrupted their conversation. They both knew it was unlikely that a bantha would be roaming wild about this region, for there was little grazing area anywhere near the desolate moisture farm. But they had heard the call and could identify it without doubt, and they suspected that potential enemies were near. What is driving them so close to the farms? Owen asked. It's been too long since we've organized anything against them, Klieg replied gruffly. We let the beasts run free, and they're forgetting the lessons we taught them in the past. He looked hard at Owen's skeptical expression. You have to go out there and teach the Tuskens their manners every now and then. Owen just stood there, having no response. You see how long it's been? Klieg said with a snort. You don't even remember the last time we went out and chased off the Tuskens. There's the problem, right there. The bantha lowed again. Klieg gave a growl in the general direction of the sound, waved his hand, and walked off toward the house. You keep Beru close for a bit, he instructed. The both of you stay within the perimeter and keep a blaster at your side. Owen nodded and dutifully followed as Klieg stalked into the house. Right before the pair reached the door, the bantha lowed again. It didn't seem so far away. What's the matter? Shmi asked the moment Klieg entered the house. Her husband stopped and managed to paste on a bit of a comforting smile. Just the sand, he said. Covered some sensors, and I'm getting tired of digging them out. He smiled even wider and walked to the side of the room, heading for the refresher. Klieg, Shmi called suspiciously, stopping him. Owen came through the door then, and Beru looked at him. What is it? She asked, unconsciously echoing Shmi. Nothing at all, Owen replied. But as he crossed the room, Beru stepped before him and took him by the arms, forcing him to look at her directly, into an expression too serious to be dismissed. Just signs of a sandstorm, Klieg lied. Far off and probably nothing. But already enough to bury some sensors on the perimeter? Shmi asked. Owen looked at her curiously, then heard Klieg clear his throat. He looked to his father, who nodded slightly, then turned back to Shmi and agreed. The first wins, but I don't think it will be as strong as Dad believes. Are you both going to stand there lying to us? Beru snapped suddenly, stealing the words from Shmi's mouth. What did you see, Klieg? Shmi demanded. Nothing, he answered with conviction. Then what did you hear? Shmi pressed, recognizing her husband's semantic dodge clearly enough. I heard a bantha, nothing more, Klieg admitted. And you think it was a Tusken mount, Shmi stated. How far? Who can tell, in the night, and with the wind shifting. Could have been kilometers. Or? Klieg walked back across the room to stand right before his wife. What do you want from me, love? He asked, taking her in a firm hug. I heard a bantha. I don't know if there was a Tusken attached. But there have been more signs of the raiders about, Owen admitted. The doors found a pile of bantha poodoo half covering one of their perimeter sensors. It may be just that there's a few banthas running loose in the area, probably half starved and looking for some food, Klieg offered. Or it might be that the Tuskens are growing bolder, are coming right down to the edges of the farms, and are even beginning to test the security, Shmi said, almost prophetically. Just as she finished, the alarms went off, indicating a breach about the perimeter sensor line. Owen and Klieg grabbed their blaster rifles and rushed out of the house, Shmi and Beru close behind. You stay here, Klieg instructed the two women, or go get a weapon at least. He glanced about, indicated a vantage point to Owen, and motioned for his son to take up a defensive position and cover him. Then he rushed across the compound, blaster rifle in hand, zigzagging his way, staying low and scanning for any movement, knowing that if he saw a form that resembled either Tusken or bantha, he'd shoot first and investigate after. But it didn't come to that. Klieg and Owen searched the whole of the perimeter, scanned the area and rechecked the alarms, and found no sign of intruders. All four stayed on edge the remainder of that night, though, each of them keeping a weapon close at hand and sleeping only in shifts. The next day, out by the eastern rim, Owen found the source of the alarm, a footprint along a patch of sturdier ground near the edge of the farm. It wasn't the large round depression a bantha would make, but the indentation one might expect from a foot wrapped in soft material, much like a Tusken would wear. We should speak with the doors and all the others, Klieg said when Owen showed the print to him. Get a group together and chase the animals back into the open desert. The banthas? Them too, Klieg snarled. He spat upon the ground, as steely-eyed and angry as Owen had ever seen him. Senator Padme Amidala felt strangely uneasy in her office, in the same complex as, but unattached to, the royal palace of Queen Jamilia. Her desk was covered in holodisks and all the other usual clutter of her station. In front of it, a holoplay through the numbers, a soldier on one scale, a flag of truce on the other, tallying the predicted votes for the meeting on Coruscant. The hologram depiction of those scales seemed almost perfectly balanced. Padme knew that the vote would be close, with the Senate almost evenly divided over whether the Republic should create a formal army. It galled her to think that so many of her colleagues would be voting based on personal gain. Everything from potential contracts to supply the army for their home systems to direct payoffs from some of the commerce guilds, rather than on what was best for the Republic. In her heart, Padme remained steadfast that she had to work to defeat the creation of this army. The Republic was built on tolerance. It was a vast network of tens of thousands of systems, and even more species, each with a distinct perspective. The only element they shared was tolerance. Tolerance of one another. The creation of an army might prove unsettling, even threatening, to so many of those systems and species, being far removed from the great city planet of Coruscant. A commotion outside drew Padme to the window, and she looked down upon the complex courtyard to see a group of men jostling and fighting as the Naboo security forces rushed in to control the situation. There came a sharp rap on the door to her office, and as she turned back that way, the portal slid open and Captain Panaka strode in. "Just checking, Senator," said the man, who had served as her personal bodyguard when she was queen. Tall and dark-skinned, he had a steely gaze and an athletic physique only accentuated by the cut of his brown leather jerkin, blue shirt, and pants, and the mere sight of Panaka filled Padme with comfort. He was in his 40s now, but still looked as if he could outfight any man on Naboo. "Shouldn't you be seeing to the security of Queen Jamilia?" Padme asked. Panaka nodded. "She is well protected, I assure you." "From?" Padme prompted, nodding toward the window and the continuing disturbance beyond. "Spice miners," Panaka explained. "Contract issues. Nothing to concern you, Senator. Actually, I was on my way here to speak with you about security for your return trip to Coruscant." "That is weeks away." Panaka looked to the window, which gives us more time to properly prepare. Padme knew better than to argue with the stubborn man. Since she would be flying an official starship of the Naboo fleet, Panaka had the right, if not the responsibility, to get involved. And in truth, his concern pleased her, although she'd never admit it to him. A shout outside and renewed fighting drew her attention briefly, making her wince. Another problem. There was always a problem somewhere. Padme had to wonder if that was just the nature of people, to create some excitement when all seemed well. Given that unsettling thought, Solo's words came back to her, along with images of Ryu and Puja. How she loved those two carefree little sprites. "Senator," Panaka said, drawing her out of her private contemplations. "Yes?" "We should discuss the security procedures." It pained Padme to let go of the images of her niece at that moment, but she nodded and forced herself back into her responsible mode. Captain Panaka had said that they had to discuss security, and so Padme Amidala had to discuss security. The Lars family was being serenaded through yet another night by the lowing of many banthas. None of the four had any doubt that Tuskens were out there, not far from the farm, perhaps even then watching its lights. They're wild beasts, and we should have gotten the Mos Eisley authorities to exterminate them like the vermin they are. Them and the stinking Jawas. Shmi sighed and put her hand on her husband's tense forearm. "The Jawas have helped us," she reminded him gently. "Then not the Jawas!" Klieg roared back, and Shmi jumped. Taking note of Shmi's horrified expression, Klieg calmed at once. "I'm sorry, not the Jawas then, but the Tuskens. They kill and steal whenever and wherever they can. No good comes of them. If they try to come in here, there will be less of them to chase back into the desert," Owen offered, and Klieg gave him an appreciative nod. They tried to finish their dinner, but every time a bantha sounded, they all tensed, hands shifting from utensils to ready blasters. "Listen," Shmi said suddenly, and they all went perfectly quiet, straining their ears. All was quiet outside. No banthas were lowing. Perhaps they were just moving by, Shmi offered when she was certain the others had caught on. Heading back out into the open desert where they belong. We'll go out to the doors in the morning, Klieg said to Owen. We'll get all the farmers organized, and maybe get a call in to Mos Eisley as well. He looked to Shmi and nodded, just to make sure. In the morning, Owen agreed. At dawn the next day, Owen and Klieg started out from the compound before they had even eaten a good breakfast, for Shmi had gone out ahead of them, as she did most mornings, to pick some mushrooms at the evaporators. They expected to pass her on their way out to the Doors farm, but instead found her footprints, surrounded by the imprints of many others, the soft boots of the Tuskens. Klieg Lars, as strong and tough a man as the region had ever known, fell to his knees and wept. We have to go after her, Dad, came a suddenly solid and unwavering voice. Klieg looked up and back to see Owen standing there, a man indeed and no more a boy, his expression grim and determined. She is alive, and we cannot leave her to them, Owen said, with a strange, almost supernatural calm. Klieg wiped away the last of his tears and stared hard at his son, then nodded grimly. Spread the word to the neighboring farms.